Afternoon. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to next seminar in the Breathing City series. So my name is Alison Tom and I'm from the University of Leeds, co-I on the project, which is led by Professor Kath Noakes, as you know. So for those of you who haven't been to one of these seminars before, just give you a brief introduction to the network. So we are a network activity, and the aim of the network is to develop a technical framework to enable a new integrated health evidenced approach to urban building design, the breathing city, as you will. And the idea is that we'll create a strategy for an approach which will consider both indoor and outdoor sources of air pollution, and also the exchange and coupling between those sources, and design and ventilation design particularly to minimise impact in terms of human health and thermal comfort. So we're bringing together quite a diverse series of researchers. So there's 15 co-investigators from UK universities and Public Health England who are all featured here on this slide. We've got 16 partners, external partners from industry, professional institutions, local councils, and the health sector. So that's a brief introduction to the network. There's a few housekeeping issues before I introduce today's speakers. So if you could keep yourselves on mute throughout the presentation, please, and maybe you could turn your cameras off just to give us a bit more bandwidth. If you have questions, please post them in the chat, and I will then deliver those questions to the speakers at the end. Please be respectful of the contributions of other participants. We are recording today's session, and if any of you are tweeters on Twitter, then please tag us and advertising your views on the presentation on Twitter at Breathing City. Okay, so great pleasure today to introduce our speakers. So got Jim McQuaid and Kirsty Pringle. So Jim is an associate professor in the School of Earth and Environment at Leeds. He's been at Leeds quite a while, not quite, but nearly as long as me. He started out in the School of Chemistry, where he carried out his undergraduate and postgraduate studies, and then moved to the School of Earth and Environment in the year 2000. So he's mainly an experimental scientist, and his work focuses on instrument development and also measurement of composition, both in the gas and aerosol phase. It covers quite a broad range of scales, actually. So from all the way from doing aircraft measurements over the Greenland ice sheet, back down to where the rest of us sort of live at the urban scale, urban streets and buildings. He's also part of the university's living lab for air quality. Kirsty Pringle is a research scientist in the School of Earth and Environment at Leeds. She's got BSc from the University of Edinburgh and a PhD from Leeds. She's also worked as a research scientist at the Max Planck Institute and at the Met Office, UK Met Office. And her work focuses on the role of fine particles and how they impact on both climate and air quality with health links. So both Jim and Kirsty have been involved in quite a lot of outreach and citizen science projects, actually. Kirsty particularly most recently has been involved in a local citizen science experiment in Saltaire, which is near Bradford, supporting residents there and taking measurements of air quality around the town. And so that kind of feeds nicely into the topic of their webinar today, which is measuring children in Bradford's exposure to air pollution. So I think Jim's going to kick off and then hand over to Kirsty halfway through. So looking forward to the presentation.
You should be able to. How's that, Alison?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and thank you for attending today, and hopefully we'll give you some insight into our project. So I'm going to kick off this. So we're sort of tag teaming this, and I'm going to talk about the project design and also the Bradford Clean Air Zone. There's a range of different clean air zones and different approaches that have been taken across the country. And we're going to focus on the Bradford clean air zone itself. So just to introduce the project. So this is, for me, this is a very exciting project. It's just shy of £1 million funded by the NIHR. So, and traditionally, as Alison said, you know, I go out and do the sort of more conventional, go out, take some measurements and write a paper or write papers, analysing the data. Whereas this is working with health economists, behavioural scientists. So we're going from the measurement stage all the way through to literally talking to the school children, their parents, the teachers. We're working closely with the council and community groups. So, you know, the potential to make direct impact and see that impact in place is new to me, and it's very exciting. Actually, it's a huge motivation compared to a lot of the work that I've done before. So I'll kick off initially why Bradford is an incredible place to do this, and why it is a very interesting and different location to do compared to other locations with clean air zones. And then Kirsty will take you through the sort of the nitty gritty of the challenges of doing this, particularly in a COVID world, which has made our life, I think when I spoke to her earlier, we decided the word was nightmare. Just to introduce the project itself. So in 2022, the beginning of 2022, Bradford will bring in their clean air zone. They have had over £30 million worth of funding from the government for this. It has been delayed because of the pandemic, but they're still moving forward with this. They've had many consultations, and a lot of the communities and the people, the businesses that will be impacted this are actually now getting on board. And I know this because I've been to Bradford to actually speak to some of these, you know, particularly groups like taxi drivers and things like that. And when you explain to them the impact of this, they really do understand this. And obviously the financial backing is making it a lot more feasible. So the project itself will look at three specific things. So we're looking at the children's exposure to air pollution the year before and the year after the implementation of the clean air zone. And hopefully that's what we got in the project, but hopefully we will continue making measurements. Because of what Born in Bradford actually has in place, and Kirsty will go into that in greater detail, we can also, with the health experts, look at the children's health in the 3 years before and after. So we've got quite a large time span of health data. We can look at that. And ultimately, we're looking at the economic and societal impacts of the clean air zone, including the health benefits from an economic perspective. And this is why it's, I guess this is why the core funding is in place, because in the long term, this is the NHS investing in something that is going to improve the health of the community in Bradford for literally decades to come. And obviously, if you improve the health, that reduces the economic burden on the health service and improves the economy, because people are able to work. They're not off work because they're sick. So ultimately, it's the NHS with a long-term investment in health for the benefit of I guess the bottom line of the NHS. So what's so special about Bradford? So I'm from Yorkshire, so I'll say it's in Yorkshire, and that's all you need to know. But geographically, it's on the western side of the West Yorkshire conurbation. There's a huge range of diversity of the population, and as we've seen with COVID, which is a respiratory disease, where there is levels of social deprivation, that leads to, you know, the levels of air quality are increased, and the levels of air pollution are increased. So as the air quality levels go down, then people are more vulnerable to respiratory diseases such as COVID. And I'm sure as time goes on, these linkages will be pretty clear when people start looking at the data in years to come. But from a historical perspective, Bradford, maybe rich is the wrong word, but Bradford has a rich history of industry stretching right back to the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So there's the population has always been living under the cloud of air pollution itself. But it's important, one thing that I think about is to think about Bradford itself geographically. So if you just look at this road sign, you can see that although we're talking about, you know, Bradford has been an industrial centre, it's very, very close to the Yorkshire Dales, and we've also got areas like Keighley, Skipton, Shipley, Bingley, and out to Harrogate. So there's a huge diversity of the socioeconomics of the population in the surrounding area as well. But Bradford itself is a very deprived community. So a third of the population are in the lowest decile of deprivation in the country. And a lot of this is centred around the city centre, but you can also see that when we're talking about the Bradford area, we're also including out as far as Keighley, and there's a major road transport linkage between Bradford and Keighley, and we'll see that later on. So, and the focus of this research, if you need only one number to be looking at, and I take 38% of childhood asthma being attributed to air pollution as, you know, it's a single number that motivates this entire project as far as I'm concerned. That's a huge fraction of the children in Bradford. Their asthma cases are directly linked to air pollution. And as you all know, there's many other health impacts of exposure to air pollution. So, and our project itself will focus particularly on the two main legislated pollutants, nitrogen dioxide and PM 2.5. Nitrogen dioxide, we're going to use diffusion tubes at school gate to track that. And the part of the project that me and Kirsty are mainly involved with is the implementation of static and portable PM 2.5 measurements in the schools. So just to illustrate the sort of layout of the metropolitan area, I've got some maps here just showing a few indicators, and we've got so PM 2.5, and as I said before, you can clearly see this. You can see where the road transport network links Keighley to Bradford itself, and other metrics, these just indicating sort of centres of population. So we've got noise, and then also the green spaces. It's always important to point out for Bradford, although the centre of Bradford is very densely populated, you don't have to go very far from the centre of Bradford to be in some wonderful countryside, nice, clear, open green spaces. So, and one thing I just thought I'd point out, and this is sort of indicative of what happened, or what a lot of the communities in Bradford are exposed to. So this is a tyre fire last year, and I actually went to the site. So this is quite an incredible thing to behold. So 600,000 tyres at an illegal tyre dump were set ablaze, and this is there's currently an arson case going through the courts, and this was in the centre of Bradford itself. So when I went, they closed down a lot of the city centre so the fire appliances could get to this, and areas of Bradford actually ran out of water because so much water was being pumped into this fire, and it burnt for 2 weeks. This is a pretty horrific thing, and I think there's, you know, I'd be pretty safe to say that there will be health implications on the communities who are downwind of this. So over 20 schools were closed, lots of industries, and a lot of the city centre was shut down. And I've just got a trace here at the bottom. So this is a purple air sensor that's actually hanging out of the window of my office at the university. And you can see the impact just on the day after I'd been to the fire. In the afternoon, I suddenly started smelling the fire again, and you can just see this rise as the air was brought round and swung over the university campus. So you can see the transport to that, and it was quite incredible to smell burning tyres in Leeds from a fire that was in Bradford. So that just shows you the level that we were dealing with. So Bradford, like many cities, about 3 or 4 years ago, started looking at the bringing in of a clean air zone, and this is particularly targeting nitrogen dioxide, because nitrogen dioxide is primarily a traffic pollutant, but we're using PM 2.5 because of the technology is much more reliable for small low-cost sensors for PM 2.5 compared to nitrogen dioxide, and they're very closely coupled. I think we're happy that there's a strong relationship between them. And if we look at when putting together where the clean air zone was itself, so it's pretty obvious to start mapping that out based on levels of pollution on traffic. And you can see here once again we've got the Bradford city centre, we've got the Bradford ring road, and then we've got the sort of link road that goes up to Keighley, the main road there. And you can see the timeline of these, and you can imagine, you know, it's just a Gantt chart that the council have put together to create a clean air zone. And this is the actual outline of the clean air zone, or the boundary of the clean air zone that they finally came up with. And it was designated as a Class C clean air zone. So that's buses, coaches, all the way to taxis, but doesn't include private vehicles. So just to remind people of the different vehicle classifications. So we're talking about the Class C, and that also does include taxis and private hire vehicles. But as I said earlier, having spoken to some of the taxi drivers, they're beginning to get on board, because a lot of them have young families, and these are the people who've been impacted by the levels of pollution. And obviously, as I said, the grants that are available are bringing people on board. You have to provide economic support for people to get behind clean air zones. And this is a modelling study that the council had done. So this is the predicted relative change in nitrogen dioxide. You can see obviously in the western side there's pretty low levels, so we won't see that's not showing up much. But obviously on the eastern side that is impacted by Bradford pollution itself, you can see that's where there is a significant change in that. And these changes are approaching the levels of reduction that we saw during the first lockdown. So there was a lot of interest in how much the lockdown affected NO2, and generally we've been looking at between 30 and 50% reduction in NO2 at the beginning of the first lockdown that we had during the pandemic. And it's not just about the clean air zone, but there is a clean air plan. So these are things like park and ride, providing the infrastructure for electric vehicles. And so there's a plethora of different levels of support that have to be put in place. It's not just creating the clean air zone and giving grants out, but actually improving the infrastructure to enable people to live and work in associated with the clean air zone itself. And the project itself, like any large research project, is divided up into work packages. So you can see, if you look at this, survey this, you can see where the different levels of scientific expertise, specifically, there's a lot of social science expertise coming into this, and we're also working very closely with the council and the university in Bradford itself, and community groups. So this is very much we're getting on board and going and talking to the communities, and particularly what we're talking about today is work package 2. So that's making the measurements. So particularly what we're working around at the moment is our using our citizen scientists. So this is the school children themselves. So we have a number of schools that we've selected, and we're working with the schools because we've got to work with the schools and get them engaged to collect the data. So we're collecting data before and after the implementation of the Clean Air Zone. And there was a very interesting talk a few months ago by Ben Barrett, who's done a not dissimilar study in London, and we've had some very interesting discussions with him, because there's going to be an absolutely phenomenal amount of data, but it's going to be a significant challenge to go through and find what's the valid data, because this is going to be a very challenging task to take on. And so we've been working closely with Ben, and Ben's actually on the steering group for the project. So this is where there's a lot of other projects that people are firing up. So we're more than happy to talk to people about our experiences, because you know, some of the things that we've learned along the way, we're more than happy to share with people. So we've selected our schools, and this is you can see on the Clean Air Zone itself, and we're working with primary schools, so you can see how we've separated them out, and we've chosen them simply by the level of engagement of the schools with the project. There's no point going to a school in an ideal location if they're not on board with this, because schools and teachers have huge numbers of different pressures. So we need to work with schools that are really keen on this, and this is where we're talking to the teachers and the governors and the parents is really invaluable. And in the top corner, I'm just showing one of the most important scientists, and this is a genius idea, which I have to doff my cap to Kirsty. So we've actually got a number of these vests that we give to the school children, and if you turn them into scientists, they get really, really excited and engaged about it. So we're learning, an awful lot as we go along this. And just to illustrate this, so we've got schools within the Clean Air Zone, and then we've got schools sort of on the boundary of the Clean Air Zone, remembering that on the western side of Bradford, there's a lot cleaner air. So we've thought about that. And then we've got 4 schools further away from the Clean Air Zone. So there's lots of different transport mechanisms to these schools as well. And we'll be monitoring over a total of 2 years, but hopefully this will go on further, depending on the lifetime of our sensors. And we've got each year we'll have we're planned on having a number of sampling periods during the year, because we don't want to make too much work for the schools, so we've got to keep them engaged in it. And we have got like I said, 12 schools, and then up to 20 pupils per school, and then we'll have a rota so we can get a good coverage of transport styles and where the children live, and particularly working with the year 5 and year 6 pupils. And a lot of this is working with the teachers in the schools, and we're working very closely with Jamie Thorpe, who is the science teacher at St Stephen's School in Bradford, as our sort of champion school, and we're using them to help develop how we're doing this study. So I'll just wrap up there, and I'll now hand over to Kirsty, who will take you through the sensors and a lot of the things that we've learned along the way and how we're engaging with everybody. So I'll stop sharing now, Kirsty.
Cool. Thank you very much, Jim. I will just share mine. Does that look okay?
Yeah, that looks good. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that introduction. So Jim's kind of talked about the project in terms of so he's talked a lot about the interventions, the Clean Air Zone, and that kind of thing. Like, so BiB Breathe is kind of really built about measuring, trying to evaluate the change in children's exposure to air pollution that will result as a kind of come about as a result of the clean air zone. What I'm going to talk about more is talk about kind of some of the engagement that we've been trying to do, some of the community engagement that we've been trying to do. So our work package within BiB Breathes is reliant on, it's a citizen science project, and all citizen science projects really are dependent on engagement. And so we need to ensure that the children and the teachers and the families that we're working with, that we'd like to kind of carry our monitors, are engaged throughout the project. So one of the good things about this is the fact that we're doing it is the project's led by Barn and Bradford. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Barn and Bradford study. They're really experts in community engagement and participatory research, which isn't my background at all. So it's something that we're kind of learning as we go along. But it's a real kind of strength of the project is the fact that that Barn and Bradford have really deep community links. So just to give a bit of background, Barn and Bradford is basically a large birth cohort study. So what they did is between the years 2007 and 2011, any woman that gave birth in Bradford Royal Infirmary was invited to join the study. So they said, you know, would you like your baby to be involved in this research study? Over 80% of the women that they asked said yes. And that resulted in 12,000 women signing up to the study. And with that is 13,000 children. So these kids here are just some of the twins within the study. There's 173 sets of twins and 3 sets of triplets within the birth cohort study. Of the people that are involved in the Barn and Bradford birth cohort study, half of these women and children live within the 5th most deprived wards for England and Wales, and 45% are of Pakistani origin. So it was, when it was set up, it was a really ambitious study, and the idea of the study, it was built to address a need. So basically they realized that children in Bradford had typically poorer rate of health than children living in other areas. So it was a targeted study designed to understand why. Well, we all know that kind of there's issues with deprivation which can cause ill health, but what they wanted to understand is exactly what they could do about it. What factors are contributing to this? Is it diet? Is it lifestyle? Is it air pollution? So they're looking at all these different factors and trying to unpick the different influences. So we're all influenced by different things as we go through our day. So they're trying to unpick these different influences and work out which of these influences are contributing to existing rates of ill health within the city, with the aim of trying to improve health and well-being of the children within the city. So it's really designed to be research that kind of changes a city. But because Barn and Bradford has been going on for so long, and because the research they do, because they're following this birth cohort of children, they regularly go into schools and work with the children. They're often having to go in and take extra measurements with the children. They've got this kind of really, because they want people to stay involved with the birth cohort study. It's a long-term study, so they need long-term engagement. And that means they have quite deep roots within the community. But from a clean air perspective, that's also an advantage, because it means that you can, using these kind of deep roots and connections within the city, you can kind of develop, you can use this existing relationship to try and understand people's attitudes to air pollution and the clean air zone. So these are some quotes from a paper in preparation, which is written by Rosie McKechen, who's the lead of Barn and Bradford. So what she did is she interviewed people within what they call seldom heard communities. So these are people that are typically quite difficult to engage with. They're not people that would generally turn up to a town meeting. They're not generally people that would be confident to, you know, write to the MP or write to the local council or something like that. They're generally people that can live in quite high numbers in Bradford, but don't necessarily get their voice heard in the development of policy. So they talked to people within these communities, and they asked about clean air zone and their attitudes to air pollution, and they got this real range of different answers. So some people said, you know, the typical, anyone that works with air quality has heard this before, you can't see it. How do you know? You say it, we're told it's poor air quality, but you can't see it, which is really understandable. And then you have things where people said that they understood that while the city centre within Bradford was polluted, there's also cleaner areas. So there's kind of so it's Leeds Rose areas, there's a breathing disease that you've got places like Bingley who have less traffic, less pollution, more greener spaces. So there's an awareness of the inequality, this unequal exposure to air pollution that exists depending on where you live. some people weren't particularly bothered by the air pollution. They would rather the council prioritise other things. So one thing that came across is other sources of pollution that they would rather the council focused on. One of these is fly tipping. So this quote here says, you know, it happens regularly, it's smelly. It's also a very visible pollutant. So they would rather the council focus on that. And then this is the final quote I've got from this paper, where it really shows the level of difficulty with this. So she says that, you know, sometimes I have to decide if I should eat or pay the bills. We're the wrong people to ask about these things. So this is kind of like people that are living in very deprived areas don't necessarily have the headspace to deal with an extra problem, to think about an extra thing. They're just kind of struggling to get through the day as it is. And so if you're trying to kind of engage with people and work with people, you need to be really sensitive to the other things that are going on in their lives and the pressures that they're under. And so we're very kind of aware of this when we designed our monitoring strategy. We wanted to make sure that it was extensive enough, that we got enough data that we could kind of learn as much as we wanted to. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that it was practical in terms of it was actually achievable. So as Jim says, we're focusing on particulate matter air pollution. So we have sensors that measure PM1, PM2.5 and PM10, so these different size categories of particulate matter aerosol. Of the 12 schools, we have 3 static sensors per school. One of these is outdoor. This is an example of one of our outdoor sensors. It's just on a cable through the window. And two of our sensors will be indoor in classrooms. And that gives us an opportunity to compare, obviously, indoor and outdoor values and look at the correlations between them. For the portable measuring, we've got 5 portable sensors per school. And as Jim said, it's going to cycle through different kids in the class. So in total, if every child gives us permission, we can have 30 children in the class all carrying a monitor for a week. In total, if ever we get everyone to participate, that will be 240 children who will have had the experience of carrying the monitor, and that we will have information about their exposure as they go to and from school. For our portable monitors, our static monitors run 24/7. Our portable monitors switch themselves off at night. So they wake up in the morning automatically, and then they switch themselves off at night. So the idea is we didn't want the children to have to turn something on just in case they forgot, or turn something off, because you could see that going wrong. But we also wanted the sensors to rest at night, partly to save battery and partly for people's privacy reasons. So this is just a kind of deconstructed air quality sensor to show you the different bits that are involved. The portable and the static sensors, they use the same particulate matter monitor, and they have the same basic design. There's just some changes in the code in terms of how exactly they turn on and off and things like that. So what we use is we use the Alpha Sense OPC R1. So there's been kind of this real explosion in the number of different ways of measuring different products that you can buy, low-cost PM2.5 sensors, low-cost particulate matter sensors. There's probably about 7 or 8 different low-cost sensors you can buy. They all seem fairly similar. They range in price from about £20 per sensor to about £200 per sensor. So we've gone for a higher cost one. These are about £110 per sensor. And they're made by a company called Alpha Sense, which we've had good experience with in the past. So we went for that because we wanted the higher quality of a higher kind of cost sensor, especially because we realized it's such a phenomenal amount of effort and organization to get these kids to do this measuring, that we wanted to make sure that we're getting high quality data. The portable sensors also have a GPS, obviously, so we can know where the children have walked as they go to school, temperature and relative humidity. The code for the sensors is all freely available. You could download it. You can buy yourself a little Raspberry Pi and run the code. If you are interested, then drop us an email because we can talk you through it. But the idea that it is an open source project, so anyone can take this information and build their own should they want to. We were going to run events that were like, build your own air quality stuff, but all that's been shelved due to COVID, but they're not difficult to put together. It's just plugging some stuff in. So we could, in principle, in the future, run community sessions where we teach people to build air quality monitors, and then they can kind of go and take the measurements that they'd like to take. So this is just the photo of the bum bags in action. They're possibly not the most fashionable things to wear, but thankfully the kids don't seem to mind too much. We looked at maybe having portable sensors in a backpack rather than having it in on a bum bag, but we found that the bum bags are actually, I think, a little bit better just because it doesn't bounce around so much. If you can tighten the bum bag up fairly tight, it sits just over the stomach, and children can use them. You know, they can go around the play park and things like that, and they don't seem to get in the way too much. So hopefully the idea is the children more or less forget that they're wearing them, and just carry on with their usual activities. So it would be wonderful to say that everything was going swimmingly, but it's an ambitious project and we're hugely delayed in it. And yeah, we have had a number of issues. We've had a lot of technical issues with the sensor communicating the Raspberry Pi and the particulate matter sensor. It's taken us a long time to kind of unpick all of those. Obviously, access to schools with COVID has been very difficult. We spoke to, so Jim mentioned that we have a teacher who's one of the co-applicants on this project, Jamie Thorpe. So he's kind of our barometer in terms of whether we want to, when we have to stand back and say, look, schools are too busy, they can't cope with this, and when we can engage. And throughout a large part of kind of the peaks COVID waves, Jamie just said to not try. So we kind of offered whether we could do some kind of online engagement or something like that. But he said that his school and also a lot of the schools of inner Bradford, they have very low rates of pupils with reliable access to internet. So there's no point doing like a kind of online engagement activity if the children don't have access to internet. And the level of engagement of the children that he was finding within his class, and he said this was pretty representative, he was really struggling to get the kids to do kind of to do the bare minimum of a bit of reading and a bit of writing. So we just kind of stepped back from the schools for quite a long time, because we didn't think it was really appropriate. The other thing that we've struggled with is, I kind of touched on this, is that the sensor we've chosen, I chose my decision, it seems quite breakable. I mean, they're not designed for portable monitoring, so that's fine. But at the same time, even, yeah, it doesn't seem particularly robust, and it can give sometimes quite inconsistent results. So we need to be very careful in terms of how we use them. So our project design, the idea is that the kids will take the monitors, kids will wake up in the morning, put the portable, have the breakfast, do whatever. When they leave for school, they'll put on the bum bags, walk to school with the bum bag. And then when they get to school, they'll unplug the bum bags and then charge just using a USB charger. But then the bum bags, each of the 5 portable monitors and the static monitor will be side by side monitoring in the classroom for at least a couple of hours. And the advantage of that is obviously it gives us some time periods that we can intercompare. So we can exclude any of the monitors that are not working or that are kind of way off, and potentially kind of work out if we can apply any fixes to the data. But it would be nice if they intercompared really well. So this is just an example of 2 static sensors. This is within a school, within one of our schools. It's quite central in Bradford. So these are 2 static monitors side by side, which we just put into side by side just to see whether they were giving us serious similar values in a school environment. It's fairly encouraging, I think. What we have got is we've got this is just it's a bit under a week, but it's pretty representative of what we're seeing most of the time. You have low concentrations overnight, and then you have a very sharp rise in PM2.5 on weekday mornings. So it's low before the kids and the teacher come into school, but then peaks quite quickly once the kids are in. The concentrations are elevated during the day when the children are in. The other thing we find, which is quite common with low-cost PM2.5 sensors, is that where the sensors seem to compare quite well at higher concentrations, they do tend to not compare brilliantly at lower concentrations. So we need to really think about to what extent that's an issue for our project or not. The other thing that we've struggled with is that we've had a lot of enthusiasm from the pupils. Every time we've gone to school, we've got loads of kids, you know, asking to take part, saying, when can I do it? I want to do it, that kind of thing. But we have obviously we have ethical approval for this project, but we also need parental permission. And while we've had a lot of enthusiasm from the pupils, we've had quite a low rate of return from the permission forms from the parents. And we think this is, or we hope at least, that this is not because the parents don't particularly want to be involved. We think it's just a poor rate of return of the permission forms, that perhaps parents aren't understanding that they need to fill in this form for their children to be involved. We spoke to the teachers and they said it's not unusual to have a low rate of permission forms back, and it's all about kind of how you communicate it. So to address this, what we've done is we've made a little video. It's only 2 minutes long, so I'm going to show it. But what it is, it's just a little animated video which explains the project. You'll notice there's no sound on it, and that's because we are in the process of getting voiceovers in different languages. So the 5 kind of most spoken languages in Bradford. Thankfully, there's someone born in Bradford that speaks all of this. You know, there's 5 people born in Bradford that can translate into the different languages. So they will do a little translation for us and add a voiceover to really explain the project. So the idea is that hopefully there's no parents that don't understand what the project is or what's needed.
I'll post the YouTube link into the chat as well.
Oh, thanks, Jim. We've got a little bit, deliberately added a little bit at the end where we just explained, it's not rocket science, is it? But you know that you need to do the permission slip and then you need to return it to the school. And we're hoping that this will kind of increase uptake amongst the children. I have to say, if I did this video again, so it was animated by a PhD student, Alex McGorn, if we were to design this video again, we'd probably make it a little bit less text heavy. You've seen a slightly speeded up version because you can all read fast, I'm sure. But the other thing that we've done is as much as possible, we've tried to kind of get ourselves into schools. This is a pre-COVID slide. I was in speaking to the kids, and kind of what we did is we just took half the class with portable monitors, take them, half of them to a park, half of them to a kind of busier urban area close to a road, and then we look at the data. And it gives them a chance to look at some real kind of scientific data. It's hard to communicate this kind of thing because what we want to do is we want to be sure that people know that it's an issue. Air pollution is an issue, it affects all of us, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't scare children or that doesn't put too much pressure on individual actions, because a lot of these children aren't particularly in control of a lot of the decisions around air pollution. So they can't necessarily choose which route to walk to school. They can't choose whether they get a lift to school. They certainly can't choose where they live, that kind of thing. So it's a bit of a balance between explaining that it is a problem without, creating too much fear, and encouraging people to think of like big solutions, so citywide solutions rather than or like local solutions rather than just your particular individual exposure. The other thing we've done is just kind of, this is on Clean Air Day last year, where we had the University of Sheffield kindly took the Urban Flows Observatory, which is an electric van, which is really highly kitted out and very high spec air quality equipment. And we kind of showed them the van, and Steve Jupp here gave the kids a wee talk. He gave the same wee talk to little groups of children for pretty much the whole day. But they had a chance to look at the different monitors and things like that. So they were able to understand. I think it shows the extent to which we're committed to the project. I think if we can actually kind of bring some interesting stuff into schools and say, look, you know, for the teachers, it's obviously a faff, they have to deal with all this extra stuff. So what can we give back? How can we make it worth a while for the schools to be involved? And kind of good high quality outreach events like that are actually generally pretty welcome within schools. So this is just kind of my last slide. So I really wanted to just, I think hopefully I've kind of explained what we're doing. We've got our static monitors, we've got our portable monitors. We've hopefully got this kind of engaged generation of school children that are excited about air pollution and excited about science and keen to take part. And so what I really hope is that BiB Breathes will fit into other existing projects within the city. And I think we have a really good opportunity to do this. So this is from the Act Early project, which is a collaboration between Bradford and Town Hamlets in London. And they're looking at like a whole system approach. So they're slightly different from the Born in Bradford birth cohort, because they're looking at the city level scale, but they're also looking at testing intervention. So they're imagine, they kind of have an intervention in healthy eating or something like that. And then they're trying to evaluate the effect of that intervention. Was it successful? Did people's attitudes to healthy eating change, etc.? But they're taking a holistic approach and looking at all the different influences that the children within the city are exposed to. So they have healthy places, healthy learning, and healthy livelihoods. So these three kind of themes. And air pollution obviously potentially fits into healthy learning, but also fits into healthy places in terms of healthy streets. So there's a lot of interest at the moment of doing school streets and things like that, so you close off the street to traffic and let the children walk down the street, and creating a safer environment, but also a less polluted environment for the children, more child-centered around the school. So hopefully we can, with our monitors and with our existing kind of monitoring strategy, we can help evaluate some of these projects, evaluate the effect of some of these projects. So in that sense, it's really exciting because it's kind of feeding into this kind of public health network which exists within Bradford, and hopefully that kind of maximize the effect of the project. That's me. Thank you. So now we've got.
Thanks, Kirsty and Jim. That's fascinating insights into what looks like a brilliant project, but thanks also for sharing some of the challenges. We've got some questions appearing in the chat. So everyone, if you do have questions, please post them in the chat and I will read them out to the speakers. So we've got a question from Anil Namdeo, who I remember used to be at Leeds, says, excellent presentations by both the speakers. Question for Kirsty. If alpha sense sensors are giving inconsistent results, how do you plan to overcome this issue?
So we have a backup plan, basically, in that we could potentially put 2 PM sensors per backpack, and we could do, because the cheap sensors that are ironically more consistent are quite cost effective, we could potentially run both at the same time. It just makes it a lot messier for the data. But we could potentially, or at least in some of the monitors, we could measure with 2 different types of sensor and do that into comparison. I think we're going to have to do something, Jim.
And just on that, so one advantage we do have is that we will have sensors running continually in the classroom. So when the children come into the classroom and plug them in, we'll be able to do an intercomparison. So that should highlight if there are any issues with particular sensors. It's not, these are, a standalone sensor, it's very difficult to know the performance of them. But if we bring together a cluster of them in the same location, then that will give us a head start on identifying if there's any issues with them. So that's one of the common way round that people address with low cost sensors, is actually just to cluster the sensors to overcome reliability issues.
Okay, so there's a follow-up question and comment from Christine. Could the differences at low concentrations be a limit of detection issue? What method do you use and how do you explain this concept to participants?
Shall I
Yeah, go for it. You're the instrumentalist.
That's very much an instrumental. It's sort of the error at the lower concentrations with these centres. So that certainly is one of the challenges. But when we're talking to the participants, it's very much a case of them understanding sort of relative changes. So there's little point in talking to school children or the parents about, you know, so many micrograms per cubic meter or nanograms, you know, the units that we're used to. So it's more a case of good air quality, low, smiley faces, skull and crossbones, those sorts of things. It's finding how we pitch, how we communicate this. And this is one of the things that we're learning.
See, I slightly disagree with this because I think kids can totally understand that concept. I think it's how you communicate it. I think as long as you can say over 12 isn't great, under 12 is fine, or something like that, then they can totally get that. The other thing I think it is interesting is that most people happen, like if you ask someone that's not a scientist and you run two instruments side by side, then they would expect it to give exactly the same answer. So that in itself, I think, is a really valid scientific concept, and it's not ideal, but the data that we work with is messy, and that's part of the uncertainty of science. And I think explaining that in a understandable way is really, really important, because scientists need to be trusted really by the public, and explaining uncertainty clearly within that is an essential part, I think, of building that trust.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And actually, I think even really expensive PM sensors still have measurement issues.
Yeah.
PM is just a very difficult thing to measure out. I have a question which kind of follows on to that, and then I'll come back to the question from Helen. So you showed the graph where you seem to get quite good correlation between the high concentrations of PM. That you seem to get quite consistent periods above 10 microns per meter cubed. I mean, what do you think about the WHO limits? Leeds is planning to adopt those, actually. Is Bradford planning to do the same? And do you think the clean air zone should have included PM? I don't agree with you, Jim, that the two things are correlated completely, NO2 and PM. I think
they're linked rather than correlated. You know,
yeah.
they track in a sort of sensible manner, but they're not interchangeable.
But what do you think about the WHO limits, and that would that lead to including PM 2.5 in the clean air zone?
The UK limit's so high that, you know, it's so when we do modelling studies where we look at the health impacts of PM, and we do that by taking the difference, and then there's a big focus on what you count as the safe limit of PM, and there's loads of evidence that there isn't really a safe limit. So we take 0 as our safe limit PM when we do that kind of modelling study. And then, but within public health, it's kind of assumed that, you know, anything, you know, it's assumed that really quite high concentrations are safe. I think it depends on how frequently things are exposed. But yeah, no, I didn't know that Leeds was adopting the WHO limit. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it was a Twitter exchange. I don't have any official evidence, but yeah, you had quite a few measurements above 10. So let's go back to Helen's question. Are similar projects being run in other cities with clean air zones? And if so, are there opportunities for national collaboration?
There's tons of school measuring projects. So there's a big one in Sheffield. They've got a community-based project where it started by a parent who's gone on to do a PhD in atmospheric science. But they have like 200 sensors distributed across Sheffield. But I don't know of any that are directly evaluating the effect of the clean air zone on children's health in the same way.
Okay, question from Jane Entwistle. Do you provide summary data feedback to individuals or via the school en masse, or both, or maybe online? Or
yeah, not yet is the short answer, but we will. So we do like a newsletter out to the schools. We've got a student intern that helps pull that together, kind of telling schools where we are, kind of the news. But yeah, we will write a little interface that the schools can go and look and see. It's a bit tricky because we don't know what the concentrations are yet, so we're not totally sure whether all the schools want everything to be public. So at the moment, it's up to them to decide whether they want that information to be public or not.
That's brilliant lead into the next question, actually. Can I ask this, Jim, and then you can come back in? What's the reaction you get from children and teachers when the measurements suggest unhealthy environments, and how do you mitigate the concerns? So that's exactly what you just saying. Yeah,
I mean, it's really tricky. So what we haven't done much of is so we've done a lot of trials where we kind of measured for a day, 2 here or there, but we haven't really done like a full kind of proper week with a single child. And then we haven't had a situation where you've had a particular child that stands out from the others. Like all the children seem to be much, so we haven't kind of needed to address that yet. What we have tried to do is kind of explain like the balance of risks a little bit around kind of, in the same way that, eating chocolate isn't good for you, but most people eat some chocolate. So it's kind of like a balance of it's kind of a factor within health. And but we have also encouraged people to kind of speak to MPs or speak to local councils and things like that, bring it up to the school.
And I've been into some of the schools actually talking to the school children, so they are aware of it, and conversations like how would you stay away from it, and they they have some very sensible options. They stay away from the roads, walk across the park, and things like that. So they are aware of it. And one aspect that we're trying to get across is that they do have some control over it. Just if possible, stay away from the pollution. So, and a lot of it, and I think one of the key ways of keeping the schools engaged is actually feeding it back to them, as opposed so they can see them, they're creating data and going in and talking to them. So our pilot school, our champion school, St Stephen's, the class actually know me. So I walk into the classroom and they know why I'm there. Because we one of the first visits over there was a week after that huge fire, and they all knew about the fire, and they all knew that it was bad. So actually, the tyre fire was an opportunity for exposure for our project.
Have we got time for one last question, Helen? There's one last one from Richard Daniels. As you have good health records, should you be looking at chemical composition as well as PM concentrations? Well,
we are just looking at the size, but it is a fairly obvious thing to do to try and put out some filter measurements or something just to try and get a handle on the chemical composition, because it's the chemical composition that drives the toxicity. It's not the size. The size is the transport mechanism. So see, Alison.
It's I don't know if the jury's still out on that, but yeah.
So, so it would be lovely to actually look at the chemical composition of this, but it's not in the project at the moment.
I think it's a really missing part of aerosol and health science.
Hard to do on a day-by-day basis, isn't it? You need long-term samples. There's still questions coming in, Helen. I don't know. We're past 1 o'clock, so are we carrying on? Or?
Yeah, we can carry on until
until everyone goes for lunch.
So, the indoor levels in homes, that is an ethical nightmare, and unless you can get specific families involved and things like that.
It is being done by the University of Bradford. They have a kind of I think they're doing 6 homes over 6 months. But yeah, their ethics is tricky. But I think it's quite interesting. So Ben Barrett, who's our independent chair, he said that his sensors turned off at night, and he said that he kind of actually some of the really interesting data they were getting was from the home environment, but they didn't have ethics, and again they didn't plan to measure in the home, so they couldn't use it. But I think it would be really interesting. So there's a university.
Absolutely. I went to there's one school, and all the classrooms have toasters. So, because some of the kids, they don't get breakfast. So,
right.
The schools feed them. So from a measurement perspective, it's quite interesting that we've got an artificially induced spike at about 9 o'clock as they all turn the toasters on. So, but that,
see how quickly it disperses. Yeah.
That's something that I wasn't expecting. And some of the schools have carbon dioxide monitors for ventilation now. So we're seeing, I mean, what we would have seen in classrooms a couple of years ago is probably going to be quite different to what we'll see now because of ventilation, the increase in that.
So just to end with a couple of positive comments for you. Very inspiring, this from Gabriella, very inspiring project, well done. Navigating the challenges of working in that area with schools. And then one from Kirsty, thanks for a great seminar. Happy to discuss chemical composition and LODs with anyone. Okay, so you can read all the positive comments coming in, but thanks both of you. That was really fascinating, and maybe we'll get you back in a year or two's time to report more on the results from the project. That would be great. Okay, any other comments, Helen?
No, that's all from me. We have another seminar in 2 weeks' time, so I'll advertise that in the next few days on Twitter and on the email account.
Okay, thanks to everyone for coming.
Thank you.